Hello, everyone. I'm Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, an advisory board member with Children's Health Watch and a former state legislator and public administrator. And I'm very happy to have the job of moderating this discussion. Thank you, audience, for joining us today for the third and final installment of our Pathways to Equity podcast series. This program is generously sponsored by Sam Feldman and the late Marilyn Meyerhoff. In our first two podcasts, we've reflected on the 25 years that Children's Health Watch has been in the front line of care and how its timely research advances and supports equity. In this last podcast, we're going to discuss housing insecurity and the ways that each of us can respond to the inequities facing children and families so that all children and families have equal opportunities for healthy lives and success. With me today are Dr. Avik Chatterjee, an internal medicine and pediatrics trained physician at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. He teaches social medicine at Harvard Medical School, and he's also a Children's Health Watch Advisory Board member. Joining Avik is fellow advisory board member Karen Sweet, who serves as the board's advancement chair. Karen is a longtime political activist and advocate, and she is the inaugural recipient of the Marilyn Meyerhoff Equity Award. Also with us is Serlin Kantav, who serves on the Children's Health Watch team as Engagement, Equity, and Inclusion Associate. Now that you've met our panel, let's get this discussion going. I want to start with Avik and Karen with a basic question about equity, recognizing that equity is a cornerstone of the work of Children's Health Watch. Please tell us, what does equity mean to you? Karen?
First and foremost, equity means to me to consistent food on the table, nutritious food, and a roof over your head, safe and affordable housing. Then, excellent medical care for pregnant mothers, infants, and children, high quality, affordable childcare, free high quality preschool, excellent public, elementary, middle, and high schools, tuition-free college for those who cannot afford it, desegregation, diverse residential communities, downtowns, suburbs, schools and places of work, and healthcare for all. It's a long list, but it's all part of equity.
It's a long list indeed, but it's an important list. Avik, given your work in public health, what does equity mean to you?
Sure, and I think from the perspective of Children's Health Watch, I think it's important to think about equity in terms of life opportunity, that for children, that over the course of their lifespan, they'll have equitable access to opportunities to be able to reach their potential over the course of their lives. And one image that I really like, some of you may have seen, is the image of the three little kids of different heights who are trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. And I think the version, the image that I'm thinking of teaches us that equity doesn't mean giving the same thing to every person. That is, for the three children of different heights, if you give them the same little stool, not all of them can see the game, but you match the help you're giving to each person to their needs. And so I think when we think about equity, that is, we want everyone to have the same opportunity. It doesn't mean giving the same thing to every person, but understanding what each person needs and tailoring your interventions and what you're doing to help folks so that each individual can reach their full potential.
Oh, this is awesome. Thank you very much for that very refined definition, and also Karen for your thoughts. When I agreed to moderate this discussion, one of the things that Serlin, who we're going to hear from in a moment, and I talked about was, why are we even interested in Children's Health Watch? Why did we decide to join this advisory board? And I wonder if you could just say briefly, Karen and Avik, why you were interested in the board. Avik?
Sure, I'm happy to start. Megan Sandell, who is the principal investigator for the Boston site, her work I've been following for years and years as a medical student, as a resident, the way it documents the challenges to whether it's food security, housing, and health for children across America, and the ways in which policy can either hurt children and families or help them. And knowing that that work was in the service of Children's Health Watch's mission. So when the opportunity came up to join as a board member, I was really eager to do so. I've learned so much from the work that Children's Health Watch has supported. And so, yes, it's very exciting to be on the board.
What about you, Karen?
In my case, the answer, what led me to Children's Health Watch and to become involved with equity work is blended. In 1986, having moved to Boston South End, I read about Dr. Deborah Frank in the New York Times Magazine and looked her up. When I saw her in clinic for the first time, she introduced me to a 3-year-old patient of hers. This little girl weighed the same as the 18-month-old daughter I had at home. I was pretty shocked that a child living just a short distance from where I lived would be so undernourished as to fail to gain weight and grow normally. She was a picture of inequity. I'd only seen such images from underdeveloped countries and not from our own.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, continue, please, go on. Sorry, Karen.
Well, my background played a part too. I grew up in Baltimore, a city with a large minority African-American population, but where housing segregation and inequality were the rule. Whites lived in well-to-do neighborhoods, blacks in poor sections of the city. Racial consciousness was palpable on the streets and in our home, where my mother employed Black women as domestic workers. I attended a private school where in each class of 36 students, there were only 2 non-whites. I had a sense of being privileged. And as kids, we called it out, but without understanding how pervasive it was. And notwithstanding that privilege was something I childishly took for granted, it would make me uncomfortable. For example, the race riots in Baltimore in 1967 left me pretty upset. I remember being a passenger in a car, taking our usual route along the expressway that runs elevated from the northwest suburbs to downtown, peering down and at a distance on billowing smoke from buildings on fire, seeing a burning city for the first time. And I wanted to mention one childhood experience that was influential. My father ran a family property management company. One night over dinner, he complained to me that he was not able to hire capable janitors because, as he put it, some people just don't want to work. I took this as a racial slur since I knew that all the janitors they hired were Black. So I asked him, could it be because they earned too little? What if you paid them more? My father took up the idea, and some time later, he reported back to me that they raised the janitors' wages and they were hiring better workers than before. He also told me, however, that the candidates for these jobs were now mostly white. This was revealing of a feature of the time. Blacks tended not to apply for the better paying jobs because they were used to being discriminated against and felt that they wouldn't get hired if they applied. So all these experiences had a part in my involvement in social equity work.
Thank you for that. And I would say in my own case, I was drawn to join the Children's Health Watch Advisory Board because of its mission, because of its good work, and because of at its core, it has this strong focus on eliminating childhood poverty. And I've been impressed with this research institute housed at Boston Medical Center, which collects critical data that's directly involved in advancing effective public policy at the federal, state, and local levels. I've done a lot of work with nonprofits here in the city of Boston, and they benefit from having data, from having the evidence that they need to make the case for the funding that they need and to support the work that they're doing to address a variety of social problems that our society faces. So I appreciate that about Children's Health Watch. And again, I'm happy to be part of this conversation. So back to this topic, specific topic around equity. I have some other questions. Okay, we know that a pathway to equity includes actually having policies that directly tackle inequities. And one inequity is that we witness every day pertains to our current housing crisis and the dire need for affordable housing, exacerbated by the challenges related to homelessness and to refugees in our communities seeking shelter and care. I attended Mayor Wu's State of the City address, and I do congratulate her and her administration for steadfastly working to address the crisis at Melnay Cass Boulevard and Mass Ave, and as you know, as well as her team's efforts to bring new units of affordable housing online. Dr. Avik Chatterjee, as a physician at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, what are you seeing in the work that you do? What are you seeing on the ground?
Sure, thank you so much. So I have the good fortune of being able to work on two aspects of health and homelessness that are separate, actually, in the way that the state and the city addresses homelessness. So the family homelessness system is run by the state, whereas the shelter system for adult individuals without kids is run either by individual nonprofits or by the city through the Boston Public Health Commission. And so I see sort of two entities taking on the problem. As far as family homelessness, we are facing a crisis. So the first time in the 10 years that I've been at Healthcare for the Homeless, and to my knowledge, the first time since this became law, the state has retreated from its responsibility to give shelter to families experiencing homelessness. So for decades, Massachusetts was the only state in the country that said if a family with children is experiencing homelessness, we as a state are obliged to provide shelter for them. So what that did mean is that, we had a lot of people, seeking out that help, which I think is great, right? The last thing we need is to have children on the street. And with the recent influx of migrants, many of whom are coming here to Massachusetts on purpose, but some of whom, as we know from the news, are being shipped here essentially from the border states by cynical governors playing politics. The numbers of migrant families have increased significantly. And what we've seen on the ground is an end, and Governor Healy has stated this explicitly, that they're no longer guaranteeing that families experiencing homeless children will be able to have a roof over their heads. I, for the first time in my 10 years practicing at Healthcare for the Homeless, had to send a young mom with a 5-month-old baby back to the street because she was on a wait list for DTA shelter. I've never had to do that before. Fortunately for this family, she was able to stay, and I can say this in this podcast, hopefully, but illegally with a family member in another housing situation who isn't allowed to have guests overnight, but was willing to do that for their 5-month-old family member until the state potentially could come through with something off of the wait list. So these are situations that I have never been put in, and no clinician should be put in, and society shouldn't be accepting. So the first thing I'll say is that what I'm seeing on the ground is a complete erosion of our moral authority around family homelessness and our obligation to these families. The second thing I'm seeing on the ground, you mentioned Melnea Cass and Massachusetts Avenue, Mass Cass. That is where my other clinical site is, Southampton Street Shelter. The shelter is the fullest I've ever seen it. Again, I've been there. I've been working there since it opened in 2015. People are on every surface of the shelter: floors, benches, chairs, the TV rooms, you name it. They've put a body down somewhere because they're 100+ over capacity every night. Now, this is after the closing of Mass Cass. To say that they solved the problem by swooping up the encampments is demonstrably false. Not only because the conditions in the shelter right now are completely inhumane, again, way over capacity, but two, because we are getting reports of people reconvening in spaces all across the city and other cities, including places like Cambridge and so forth. So to say you got rid of the tents and that you solved this problem of mass cast is not the case, because we know that those people who were evicted from mass cast are still people who are using drugs, if that was a concern of Mayor Wu's. There's still people who are victims of violence, including sexual violence, because just because their encampment is now under a bridge in another part of the city doesn't mean that they're not experiencing sexual violence. It's just made it so that the media isn't able to tag the image of mass cast to Michelle Wu. So one of the reasons I'm so fired up about this is that there have been solutions that were on the table and that under Mayor Wu went away. One thing I'll talk about is the Roundhouse, which was a temporary harm reduction housing site at Mass Cast for folks who were staying there, which was part of a set of solutions. So 6 harm reduction sites across the city that was meant to be temporary shelter until people could get into housing. And Roundhouse, which we're part of a team that's doing research on this, was very, very effective at connecting people to addiction treatment and keeping people, getting people onto the path to recovery and towards employment and the things they wanted in their lives. That was closed because of cost. Now, I'm not saying it's not expensive, but what I'm saying is that addressing this problem is going to be expensive. It's not going to come for free, which is what Michelle Wu is trying to do by removing people's tent encampments, their safe spaces, in favor of sort of the media and perception. So I'll stop there, but I will say that on the ground, this is the most demoralized that me and my staff have been around homelessness and housing in the city and state. And so honestly, I'm very disappointed in leaders that otherwise had a lot of great promise on that front.
Okay. I appreciate your candor and the fact that you're fired up about an issue that we all need to be fired up about. We understand that housing equity is not a recent phenomenon. It is something, and housing issues, even though you're speaking about the shelter being the fullest that it's been, and some of what you're seeing on the ground is very, very disturbing. We do have these leaders who have made a commitment to housing, and maybe that means our next speaker, who we're going to hear from, Serlin Kantab, can tell us what she knows about what the state and city are doing. And maybe there'll be a future opportunity to have someone from the state and city share with us their perspective about the work that they're doing, because certainly Governor Healy has made a commitment, a housing commitment. She ran with housing on her platform, and Mayor Wu also has a commitment to bring new units of affordable housing online. Serlin, our equity expert, Serlin Kantab, in your view, what are some of the Housing and Equities Children's Health Watch is seeing, and what's some of the work you're doing to address them?
Sure. So I think a lot of what Avik mentioned are actually sort of like the really like root causes of housing insecurity, and our research at Children's Health Watch has borne that out. So, so kind of like a two-part answer. So, you know, Boston is an expensive city to live in. So there's the high cost of living that many people have to contend with, which also plays into inadequate wages that people, you know, have that can't address their housing needs. There's a history of, you know, redlining and other discriminatory practices that inform like the racial wealth gaps that we see in the city. We have our inequitable justice system, which disproportionately arrests and incarcerates people of color, which then, you know, basically cobbles them or doesn't help when they're trying to get a job. You know, many places are, you know, hesitant to hire people who have a record. And so that informs the inability to be able to afford housing. And then, as Avik mentioned, you know, there are, you know, affordable housing programs and homelessness programs, but they're not enough, and we're at capacity. So as of December of last year, for example, a report came out from NPR that said like the state shelter system was at capacity. And typically the state has used like motels and hotels as a temporary sort of like stopgap when traditional housing options are exhausted, but those aren't really available right now because, one, the tourism, which had been stalled obviously during the pandemic, is nearing its pre-pandemic level. So motels, and there aren't as many motels and hotels available, but then the numbers of people who need care, who need home, who need shelter has exploded. We've already, Evic's already touched down on the homelessness problem that we have in the city, but then on top of that, we've had a really significant influx of refugees who have come in to Massachusetts, either of their own accord or they've been shipped here. So that's been a continuing issue. And then just in general, there's this lack of a safety net, for that would, we need like a more sufficient housing or supportive services, including mental health services and substance abuse treatment. So it's a whole sort of like cauldron of issues that are exacerbating sort of the housing inequity that we're seeing. In terms of that, just remind me, Charlotte, you were asking like not only what we're seeing in our research, but like some of the, were you asking some of the policies or some of
okay. Well, I think you're probably, this is a time, Riley. Serlin, you're not in a position to speak for the Healy administration or the Wu administration. We didn't get anybody from those either to be able to rebut or add, enlighten or anything like that. So Avik has thrown some things out there that are very important, but we don't have a way to hear from the other side on that. So I don't know if you got anything on that that you can speak to, and I can ask you about that, or maybe you can, I don't know, you could add it in later if you get it from Riley. But there were specific issues that Avik mentioned that get left hanging out there if we don't have a response.
Well, one thing I can say that I do respect in terms of the policy, some of the policy initiatives that have been undertaken. One is the initiatives from the state to require T accessible communities to increase the amount of affordable housing they have. So this is state legislation, and I think each municipality that's connected to Boston by the T has to come up with a plan to increase in units of affordable housing. And it's a great idea. If they're going to access the T, they have to, have affordable housing available for folks. It's a great idea. Each community is sort of doing it differently. The only problem is that it's just a much longer time frame than we have. The second piece that I think I've appreciated is all of the folks that I see from the border are trying to their goal, and this is part of the reason that they're applying for asylum, is that their goal in life is to work to support their families and loved ones and themselves. And because of the way there's sort of a limbo status you have once you cross the border and are applying for asylum. So the Healy administration has been working with the Biden administration to fast track work permits for these folks that are here under protected status, which I think is extremely key. I think that the minute that the guys that I see, the folks that I see in the shelter, if they were to get a work permit, they'd be working, renting, putting back into the economy. So that fast tracking of work permits is also, fantastic, but again, slower than we need. The truth is, there's just not enough housing slack to address the issues. But, over the long term, it seems like there are policies in place. It's just really unfortunate that we're at the crisis point where we are when, as a wealthy state, we honestly shouldn't be.
Thank you, Avik. Going back to, sorry, okay, go ahead, Serlin, sorry.
No, I was going to say that Avik captured a lot of what Children's Health Watch has either been a part of or has informed on the state and local, federal level. And quite a bit of what you've just said is what Mayor Wu mentioned in her address recently on Tuesday, where she talked about the efforts of her administration, like how they want to start addressing the housing affordability crisis. So one of the things that you mentioned was like the policy that's going to go into effect, or that is in effect of if a town is along like a T route and everything, that they should have a certain number of affordable housing units available. And I know that she mentioned that there's going to be, I guess, or about like 7,400 housing units that will be available for future development. And they're identifying, I guess, locations for 3,000 new public housing units to be built over the next decade, with more than $100 million, I guess, in an investment a year to maintain those units. And then there are plans to eliminate barriers to accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, by changing the zoning. As you mentioned, the change will allow owner occupants to create smaller independent units inside their homes or in their yards. She also acknowledged that there are too many families that are being displaced when apartment buildings are bought by private investors. So to combat that, the city is launching a fund to keep such buildings permanently affordable. The hope is to keep at least 400 families in their homes in 2024. Last year, a different version of that fund kept 114 families in their homes. So I think, as you mentioned, like these are all great things, but again, housing stock is extremely low or non-existent, and it's just really there are a lot of obstacles, right, in trying to create or increase the stock of housing here in the city and statewide, to be quite honest. So a lot of good is being done, but it's just taking a lot of time. And unfortunately, in the interim, like there are people who are falling through the cracks. So.
Okay, thank you for that, Serlin. We're going to move a little bit away, not entirely, but away from housing in terms of the bricks and mortar itself. And I want to move us into the topic of economic mobility. Clearly, housing and the quality of housing, the accessibility determines economic prosperity, or is linked to economic prosperity as well. But I want to talk specifically about some programs that Children's Health Watch has been a leader on, has advocated for to address poverty. So Serlin, can you talk a little bit about that? What are you doing on that front?
Yeah, so, obviously housing is its own standalone issue, but there's definitely some intersectionality with other issues that we're trying to address as an organization, and poverty overall. So obviously money is funding is a big part of that. So Children's Health Watch has doubled down on our state and federal advocacy to put cash back into families' pockets through refundable family tax credits and other kinds of direct cash transfers. Leveraging the tax code to do this helps and supports families to be able to make financial decisions that fit their needs, and also helps to avoid the cliff effect that they sometimes face in other programs as they move up the income ladder. This past year, or back in 2023, we led a successful effort to provide more funds to families throughout Massachusetts. So in October of last year, Governor Healy signed into law landmark legislation to increase the state earned income tax credit from 30 to 40% of the federal credit, and to streamline the dependent credits into a simplified, boosted, immigrant inclusive, and uncapped child and family tax credit in terms of the number of dependents. This increase means that a lot of families will be able to now see $310 per dependent this year, and then $440 per dependent in the years to come. And then, so like this expansion marks a milestone in our ongoing efforts to pass tax relief for families across the state. And this year, we will be focusing on expanding eligibility to the earned income tax credit to immigrants who despite the fact that they're paying and, filing their taxes, they're currently excluded from the credit. As you know, we're a national organization with sites in Little Rock, in Minneapolis, in Philadelphia, and Baltimore. And so we also supported tax credit expansion efforts in Minnesota, for example, including the successful creation of the most generous child tax credit in the country. And we're thrilled to see that the governor is including funding to provide critical nutrition benefits to immigrants who are currently excluded from SNAP or welfare benefits. We're also continuing to do work to protect and push for the expansion of benefits that help families and young children at the local, state, and national level. It's a pretty tough time right now, as funding is really limited, but we're going to stay engaged, stay on top of things as we have been for the past 26 years. And we hope that people who are listening will also join. And you can definitely check out our website, our social media accounts, and sign up for our newsletter just to get updates around that work.
Thank you, Serlin, for this excellent report. Riley, I want to add something in here. Maybe Serlin can record it later. One of the issues that has that come up in this conversation is the urgent need for emergency housing, for beds, for people who are homeless, for refugees who are coming into our city. Mm-hmm. And I know, Serlin, you and your team have been in touch with leaders at the state level and at the city. I wonder if you can share with us some of the measures that they have in place to address this housing crisis.
So for much of the pandemic until very recently, Boston Medical Center, where we are housed, was taking in like many people who were homeless, including many refugees who were coming from Haiti. And so they had created a task force to address that. And unfortunately, just to kind of go back to what Avik was saying at the top of the podcast, is that we reached a point of capacity, and we basically had to say that we are, we're at capacity. We can't take on more, which was a really tough decision to make. And again, I guess really just kind of
well, so I'm not putting you on the spot. I don't want.
Oh, no.
I think that you just want to. I think you want to go back and I think just get an attribution that according to so and so, this is what they're saying. That's all. Because we're not kind of giving equal time on this. We're saying that we have people on the street. They don't have housing, shelters of So I think that's just adding a couple of sentences, which Riley can do, which is according to someone, whoever it is at the state or the city, they can say in response to our concerns around this very important issue, this is what they're saying. Okay, so I don't want to put you on the spot. Okay?
No worries.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Serlin, for this excellent report. Karen Sweet, I want to come back to you, and I want to direct what will essentially be my last question. And I'll say, given your role, at Children's Health Watch, given your role as an activist and a philanthropist, I wonder if you have advice for our audience members who care about the issues that we've discussed here today. Everything from policy, poverty, equity, equity related to, hunger, housing, economic security. What are some of the things that that all of us can do to support the work of Children's Health Watch?
Sorry. I would invite you to get involved with Children's Health Watch. Subscribing to the newsletter is the first step. They're a rich reference tool about food insecurity and other social hardships that adversely affect child health. They also include a section called Take Action, with links to tools that make it easy to contact your state and federal legislators on behalf of the policies that Children's Health Watch and its partners help to craft and promote. Currently, for example, we are informing our audience and our friends that Congress has failed to provide WIC, the Food Assistance Program for Women, Infants, and Children, with the necessary funding in the fiscal year 2024 appropriation bills. If the shortfall persists, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, it will mean a $1 billion gap in this program. Without this funding, states would need to reduce WIC participation by about 2 million young children and pregnant and postpartum adults. One way to take action is to make a few phone calls or draft a few emails to your legislators, urging them to support WIC. There are instructions for posting about the importance of WIC on social media channels, and to share posts from Children's Health Watch on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc.
Thank you.
Another piece, okay, well,
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, another piece of advocacy that I've taken part in is called Lift Our Children Out of Deep Poverty. After years of lobbying, Lift Our Children Coalition succeeded in getting the legislature in Massachusetts to include 10% cash assistance grant increases in the fiscal year 23 budget. Deep poverty is income that is half the federal poverty level for a family of 3. It's very harmful to children. It causes health and emotional damage, impaired school performance, toxic stress, homelessness, and housing instability. The bills would raise maximum grants for families and for elders and persons with disabilities by 25% a year until they reach until they reach the poverty level, and then increase grants each year to keep pace with inflation. But I'm very sad to say the increase is now on the governor's chopping block because of a budget shortfall. I find it incomprehensible that the governor would prioritize tax cuts over the most basic assistance to poor families, elders, and people with disabilities. Yesterday, I sent her an email asking her to reverse course. That's something you might do too.
Thanks.
I'll come back to this, but anyway.
Well,
thank you.
We're at the end of our program, I think. We covered a lot today, everyone. It's been a rich, informative discussion, and I want to thank our panelists, Karen Sweet, Dr. Ovid Chatterjee, and Sir Lynn Kanta for their time and their insights. And I want to thank our wonderful audience for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about Children's Health Watch, or if you'd like to make your first donation or future donation to support the work that we do, to support this particular podcast, our wonderful, sorry, Riley, or if you'd like to make your first donation or support this podcast series and other wonderful programming at Children's Health Watch, please go to www.childrenshealthwatch.org. Thanks, everyone. Be well.